The security guard at NBC Studios noticed something unusual that October evening in 1976. A man was standing alone in the hallway outside Studio One, staring at the photographs on the wall, old black and white images of Bob Hope, Jack Benny, and Steve Allen from the early days of television. The man hadn't moved in almost 10 minutes. Johnny Carson had been hosting The Tonight Show for 14 years by that point, and he'd interviewed nearly every major star in Hollywood. He'd mastered the art of the 7-minute conversation, light, entertaining, always leaving the audience wanting more. He knew how to make celebrities comfortable, how to get them to tell their best stories, and most importantly, how to know when not to push too hard. But that night, something was different. John Wayne was scheduled to appear as the lead guest. It was a booking that had taken months to arrange. The Duke didn't do many talk shows anymore. At 69 years old, he was slowing down, becoming more selective about his public appearances. His last film, The Shootist, had wrapped earlier that year, a Western about an aging gunfighter dying of cancer, a role that felt uncomfortably prophetic to those who knew Wayne well. The Tonight Show staff had prepared the usual setup. They'd pulled clips from his recent films. They'd prepared questions about his career, his family, his legendary status in American cinema. Everything was designed to celebrate John Wayne, the icon, the man who'd defined what it meant to be a hero on screen for more than 4 decades. Nobody expected what was actually about to happen. Fred de Cordova, the show's longtime director, had worked with Wayne once before, back in 1972. He remembered the Duke as professional, charming, and completely in control of his public image. Wayne knew exactly what stories to tell, exactly how to play to the audience, exactly when to deliver that famous deep laugh that made everyone feel like they were sitting around a campfire with an old friend. He was one of the easiest guests we ever had, Fred told the production staff during the pre-show meeting. Just let him talk. Don't overthink it. But Ed McMahon, Johnny's sidekick and closest friend on the show, noticed something when Wayne arrived at the studio that afternoon. The actor had come early, unusual for someone of his stature. Most major stars arrived precisely on time, did their segment, and left. Wayne had shown up 3 hours before taping. He wanted to walk around the studio, Ed later recalled in an interview years after Johnny's death. He kept looking at things, the cameras, the curtain, the desk, like he was memorizing it all. Ed had asked if everything was all right. Wayne had simply nodded and said, "Just want to remember this." The Tonight Show audience that evening had no idea they were about to witness something extraordinary. They'd come to see Johnny Carson, to laugh at his monologue, to enjoy whatever celebrity happened to be promoting their latest project. When Doc Severinsen and the NBC Orchestra played John Wayne onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause, the kind of sustained, genuine ovation reserved for true legends. Wayne walked out in his typical style, dark suit, confident stride, that unmistakable presence that had dominated movie screens since the 1930s. He shook Johnny's hand, waved to the audience, and settled into the guest chair with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. The first 10 minutes went exactly as planned. Johnny asked about The Shootist. Wayne told a funny story about working with Lauren Bacall. They talked about his ranch, his children, his love of chess. The audience laughed in all the right places. Everything felt comfortable, familiar, safe. Then Johnny asked a question that was supposed to be simple. "Duke," Johnny said, leaning back in his chair with casual posture that put every guest at ease, "you've had an incredible career. Stagecoach, Red River, The Searchers, True Grit, films that defined American cinema. When you look back on all of it, what are you most proud of?" It was the kind of question Johnny had asked hundreds of times. A softball. An invitation for Wayne to talk about his achievements, to bask in the glory of a life well lived. Wayne paused. The pause lasted longer than it should have. Ed McMahon shifted slightly in his seat off camera. Something in the air had changed. "You know, Johnny," Wayne finally said, his voice quieter than before, "that's not the question that keeps a man up at night." Johnny's eyebrows raised slightly, his tell when an interview was about to go somewhere unexpected. "What question does keep you up?" Johnny asked. Wayne looked out at the audience, then back at Johnny. His jaw worked for a moment, that famous face showing something the cameras had rarely captured: uncertainty. "The question that matters," Wayne said slowly, "is what you didn't do when you had the chance." The studio had gone quieter, not silent. The cameras were still humming. Doc and the orchestra were still present in the background, but the energy had shifted. The audience sensed they were no longer watching a typical celebrity interview. Johnny Carson had an instinct that made him one of the greatest interviewers in television history. He knew when to joke, when to interrupt, and most importantly, when to simply let silence do the work. He didn't fill the space with another question. He just waited. Wayne took a breath. "December 7th, 1941, Wayne said. "I was 34 years old. Pearl Harbor had just been attacked. The whole country was signing up to fight. Every man I knew, every actor, every cowboy, every stuntman I'd worked with, they were lining up to enlist." He paused again, his hands gripping the armrests of the chair. "I didn't go," Wayne said. "I had 4 children. I had a career that was finally taking off after years of B-movies and bit parts. Republic Pictures had just offered me a contract that would change everything. And I told myself, I told everyone, that I could do more good making films that supported the war effort than I could carrying a rifle." The audience was completely still now. "Every war movie I ever made after that," Wayne continued, his voice carrying a weight that made him sound older than his 69 years. "Every uniform I put on, every battle scene I filmed. It was me trying to be the man I wasn't brave enough to be when it mattered." Johnny Carson had interviewed thousands of guests. He'd heard confessions, witnessed breakdowns, navigated awkward moments with grace and humor. But this was different. John Wayne, the symbol of American masculinity, the man who'd played soldiers and cowboys and heroes for 40 years, was revealing the core wound of his entire life. And he was doing it on live television. "Duke," Johnny said gently, his voice stripped of its usual comedic timing, "you were 34 with 4 kids. You had legitimate reasons." "Jimmy Stewart went," Wayne interrupted. "He was older than me. Clark Gable went. He was a bigger star. They went, Johnny, and I stayed home and pretended to be a hero in front of cameras." Wayne's voice hadn't broken, but something in his eyes had changed. The Duke, the invincible, unshakable John Wayne, looked vulnerable. "I met real soldiers after the war," Wayne continued, "men who'd been at Normandy, Iwo Jima, the Battle of the Bulge, and every single time one of them thanked me for my war movies, for showing them what courage looked like." He shook his head slowly. "It felt like a knife in my gut, because they were thanking the wrong man for the wrong thing." Ed McMahon, sitting off camera, later said that moment was when he understood the true burden of fame. Wayne had been carrying that weight for 35 years, Ed recalled. Every handshake from a veteran, every thank you. Every time someone called him a hero, it reminded him of what he considered his greatest failure. Johnny Carson made a decision in that moment, the kind of decision that separated him from every other talk show host of his era. He didn't try to lighten the mood. He didn't crack a joke or go to commercial. He leaned forward and treated John Wayne not as a celebrity, but as a man. "What do you wish you could tell those soldiers now?" Johnny asked quietly. Wayne looked directly at Johnny, and for a moment, the millions of people watching at home saw something they'd never seen in any John Wayne film: complete, unguarded honesty. "That I'm sorry," Wayne said simply. "That I took the easy path. That I let them fight my war while I played dress-up and cashed paychecks. That every time I played a soldier on screen, I was apologizing to them, even though I knew an apology wasn't enough." The camera stayed on Wayne's face. The director, Fred de Cordova, later admitted he'd wanted to cut to a reaction shot to break the tension, but something stopped him. "You don't interrupt a moment like that," Fred said. "That was history happening in real time." "Duke," Johnny said, and there was something in his voice that felt almost pastoral, like a priest hearing confession. "You made films that meant something to people. The Sands of Iwo Jima, they were expendable, The Longest Day. Those movies honored those men. They told their stories." "Stories someone else should have told," Wayne replied. "Someone who'd earned the right." What happened next became one of the most debated moments in Tonight Show history. Johnny Carson stood up from behind his desk. He walked around to where Wayne was sitting, and he did something he'd never done before on camera. He put his hand on John Wayne's shoulder and simply stood there. The audience didn't know how to react. This wasn't part of the show's format. Johnny never left his desk during interviews. The invisible wall between host and guest had been breached, and everyone watching could feel it. "My father fought in World War II," Johnny said, his voice barely above a conversation level, but the studio microphones caught every word. "He was on a ship in the Pacific. Came home different than when he left, didn't talk about it much." Wayne looked up at Johnny, listening. "He watched every war movie you ever made," Johnny continued. "Every single one. And you know what he told me once? He said watching those films helped him process what he'd been through, that seeing it on screen, even the Hollywood version, made it feel less lonely. Made him feel like maybe other people understood what war was really like." Johnny paused, his hand still on Wayne's shoulder. "You didn't fight the war, Duke, but you helped the men who did fight it. You helped them tell their story when they couldn't find the words. That matters. That's not nothing." The silence that followed lasted almost 15 seconds, an eternity in television time. Then John Wayne did something that no director would have ever scripted, that no actor would have ever planned. He reached up and placed his hand over Johnny's. "Thank you, Johnny," Wayne said quietly. Needed to hear that from someone. The audience, which had been holding its collective breath, erupted in applause. But it wasn't the excited applause from earlier in the show. This was different, deeper, more emotional. People in the studio were crying. Ed McMahon later admitted he had tears in his eyes. Johnny returned to his desk, and for a moment, both men just sat there, letting the audience reaction wash over them. "We're going to take a break," Johnny finally said, his voice rougher than usual. "Stay with us." During the commercial break, something remarkable happened backstage. A veteran who'd been in the studio audience, a man named Robert Patterson, who'd fought at the Battle of the Bulge, asked if he could speak to John Wayne. Security initially refused, but Ed McMahon intervened. They brought Robert backstage. Wayne stood up immediately when he saw the man's VFW jacket. "Mr. Wayne," Robert said, extending his hand, "I just wanted to say thank you, not for the movies, though I love them, but for what you said out there. My son thinks I'm a hero because I fought in the war, but I've never felt like one, never felt like I did enough. What you said about carrying something your whole life, that's exactly how it feels." Wayne shook the man's hand, and according to everyone who witnessed it, the Duke's eyes were wet. "We're all just trying our best," Wayne told him. "That's all any of us can do." They talked for 3 more minutes while the commercial break played. By the time Johnny came back on air, Wayne had composed himself, but something fundamental had shifted. The rest of the interview was lighter. Johnny made sure of that. They talked about Wayne's love of fishing, his terrible golf game, his grandchildren. The show ended the way Tonight Show episodes always ended, with laughter and Doc's band playing them out. But everyone who was there that night knew they'd witnessed something unusual. After the show wrapped, Johnny and Duke stood together on the empty stage while the crew broke down the set around them. They talked for almost 20 minutes, just the two of them, no cameras, no audience. Nobody knows exactly what they said to each other. Johnny never spoke about it publicly, and Wayne passed away less than 3 years later. But Ed McMahon, who watched from a distance, later shared one detail. "At one point," Ed said, "Duke put both hands on Johnny's shoulders and looked him right in the eyes, and Johnny nodded, like they'd just made some kind of agreement, some understanding that didn't need words." The episode aired 2 days later, on October 14th, 1976. The network had debated whether to edit Wayne's confession, whether it was too heavy, too raw for late-night television. But Johnny insisted they air it exactly as it happened. "That man trusted us with something real," Johnny told the executives. "We're not going to dishonor that by cutting it up." The response was unprecedented. NBC received over 10,000 letters in the following week. Veterans wrote in to thank Wayne for his honesty. Children of veterans wrote to say they finally understood their fathers better. Even men who'd never served wrote about their own regrets, their own feelings of inadequacy. John Wayne received letters for months afterward. One letter from a Marine who'd fought at Quezon in Vietnam particularly moved him. The Marine wrote, Mr. Wayne, I always thought you were pretending to be brave. After watching you on Carson, I realized you were trying to understand it. That means more than you know. Wayne kept that letter in his wallet until the day he died. In 1978, John Wayne was diagnosed with stomach cancer. He fought it with the same determination he'd brought to everything in his life. But by early 1979, it was clear he was losing the battle. Johnny Carson visited him 3 times at UCLA Medical Center during those final weeks. They never discussed what to talk about during those visits. Johnny would just show up, sit by Wayne's bed, and they'd watch television together or talk about nothing important: the weather, baseball, old Hollywood gossip. During the last visit, just 5 days before Wayne passed away, Duke brought up that night in 1976. "You did me a favor, Johnny," Wayne said, his voice weakened by illness but still recognizable. "Letting me say that out loud, letting me admit it." "Did it help?" Johnny asked. Wayne thought about it for a moment. "It helped me stop pretending," he said finally. "Spent my whole life pretending to be someone I wasn't. That night, for about 10 minutes, I got to be honest. That's worth something." Johnny nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "You're good at what you do," Wayne continued. "You make people feel safe enough to tell the truth. That's rare, Johnny. Don't take it for granted." It was one of the last meaningful conversations John Wayne ever had. When Wayne died on June 11th, 1979, Johnny Carson devoted the first 10 minutes of The Tonight Show to remembering him. He didn't show the usual film clips or career highlights. Instead, he talked about their conversation that October night in 1976. "A lot of people think of Duke as this invincible figure," Johnny said, sitting alone at his desk, no monologue, no jokes. But the real courage wasn't in his movies. It was in his willingness to admit he was human, to say out loud what so many of us feel but never express, that we're haunted by the things we didn't do. Johnny paused, collecting himself. "He gave me a gift that night," Johnny continued. "He showed me that being a man isn't about being invincible. It's about being honest, about carrying your regrets with dignity and still showing up every day to do your best." The camera stayed on Johnny's face for a long moment before cutting to commercial. Ed McMahon later revealed that Johnny had wanted to say more, but couldn't. He loved Duke, Ed said simply, and Duke loved him. That night in '76 created a bond between them that most people never knew about. In the years since, that interview has become legendary among Tonight Show scholars and classic television enthusiasts. Film students study it as an example of when television transcended entertainment and became art. Psychology professors use it to teach about vulnerability and masculine emotional expression. But perhaps the most meaningful testament came from Jimmy Stewart. Stewart, who had served as a bomber pilot in World War II and earned numerous medals for valor, wrote Johnny a letter after Wayne's death. In it, he said something profound. "Duke and I talked about the war sometimes. He carried that weight his whole life, thinking he hadn't done enough. But I told him what I'll tell you now. The men who fought needed something to come home to. We needed to know there was still an America worth fighting for. Duke's movies, his presence, his image, that reminded us what we were protecting. He did serve, Johnny, just in a different way." Johnny kept that letter framed in his office for the rest of his career. Looking back now, almost 50 years later, that October night in 1976 represents something we've lost in modern celebrity culture. It was a moment of genuine human connection, unscripted and unpolished, between 2 men who understood that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the foundation of real strength. John Wayne spent 40 years playing heroes, but his most heroic moment came when he admitted he felt like he'd failed. Johnny Carson spent 30 years making people laugh, but his finest moment came when he made one man feel understood. That's the power of honest conversation. That's the magic of what television can be when it stops trying to entertain and simply allows people to be human. The Duke and Johnny showed us that night what real courage looks like. Not the kind you see in movies, with guns and horses and dramatic music, but the quiet kind, the courage to tell the truth about yourself, even when that truth isn't heroic, especially when that truth isn't heroic. Because in the end, we're all carrying something. We're all haunted by the things we didn't do, the chances we didn't take, the people we weren't brave enough to be. John Wayne taught us that admitting that doesn't make you less of a man. It makes you more of one. The Tonight Show audience that October night had come to see a legend. They stayed to witness a man, and in doing so, they saw something more valuable than any movie John Wayne ever made. They saw the truth behind the myth, and they loved him more for it. That's what great television can do. It can strip away the costume, silence the orchestra, and let a human being speak from the heart. Johnny Carson understood that. John Wayne trusted him with it, and for 10 unforgettable minutes, the whole country got to listen. If you grew up watching Johnny Carson, share your memories in the comments below. Did you ever see a moment on The Tonight Show that moved you the way this one did? Tell us where you're watching from, and what the Carson era meant to you. Those nights with Johnny were special. They don't make television like that anymore, but we can still remember, and in remembering, we keep those moments alive.